Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. I am Jessica Del Mar. This is the Oneness Podcast. I'm recording this with a bit of a head cold. I'm recovering after going through this 777 portal and getting this head cold, but I'm feeling better. You just have to deal with my voice being a little bit stuffy. But I wanted to hop on and create this podcast because a lot of information's been coming through since going through this 777 portal of July. And a big aspect of what's been coming through has been about rebalancing and recalibration. So we're going through so much right now. And essentially, our bodies are rebalancing itself. It's recalibrating itself to an energetic state of being more in alignment with a higher self flow. So we are really stepping into being in a state of alignment with our higher self. We've talked about this for many years ago in terms of where we're headed, right? Being in alignment with our higher self, embodying our higher self. That's what we were working towards. And so we spent so many years about getting into alignment, healing and expressing ourselves and exposing a lot of our inner wounds and trauma. And all of it is about opening ourselves more because our higher self needs us to be an open channel enough to receive its alignment of energy. And so for many of you, you are going through this integration right now, and it means a complete rebalancing, a complete recalibration, a complete refocusing even as well in terms of many areas of your life. And it's all part of embodying more of that higher state of being. So last week, the 777 portal, I posted a newsletter about the 777 portal. Go and read that newsletter. I'll post the link to my newsletter below. And I talk all about the 777 portal and how we're stepping into this new level of self-mastery through a state of being. And that's powerful because it leads us into these integrations of recalibration that we're stepping through right now. I'm going to share each of these integrations. There were 3 integrations that came through. I'm going to share them separately in 3 separate podcasts and newsletters because there's quite a bit of information that came through for each one. And so for this episode, I want to talk about grief because grief is a huge, huge element of expression going on right now in our collective unfolding and our individual unfolding as well, and something we need to be very hyper aware of. Essentially, the veil of grief is lifting, and so there's so much to learn as this veil lifts, because I know a lot of you have been working through grief for such a long time too, and it's also one of those very tricky emotions because it's so sticky, and so it feels like it's kind of a never-ending thing and something that we're going to have to deal with for the rest of our lives kind of thing. And so I want to talk more about grief and how the body is recalibrating how we're holding on to grief in this episode. The body is rebalancing itself, but it must be given permission to do so. Meaning, if you're holding any resistance of any kind in the body, it makes it harder for the body to recalibrate. Recalibration can only occur when the body is in a complete state of ease and allowance. So, for example, when we get sick, it's basically the body forcing us to rest and get into a state of complete surrender. And that's really the only times when I do get sick, is when I'm being forced to surrender and completely let go because there is a deep recalibration occurring that I cannot interfere with. And I need to be in that complete state of allowance, rest, and let go of all of resistance. So as you integrate each of these messages over these next 3 episodes, be sure to receive it in the heart state, in an allowing state, in a receptive state of ease as much as possible. So the first theme of recalibration at this time is grief, like I was talking about, but it is recalibrating through our breath and our lungs. So breath, lungs, and grief are all connected. Our breath is the anchor to our life force energy. So is our blood, but this message is more geared towards the breath specifically at this time. And our lungs are the receptors or the mechanism in the body that directly receives that life force energy of breath. The message that came through about the lungs and breath is this. One of the most significant recalibrations the body is going through right now is grief. The lungs hold on to grief and empathy, and life force cannot fully process in the body if the lungs are shadowed with grief. Holding on to grief makes the lungs hard, phlegmy, and thick, making it like a fortress, which does not allow much of your life force to fully enter into the body or through the body. Many people are like walking zombies, with so much grief attached to the lungs and the body that the divine life force cannot penetrate through enough to breathe life back into them. This is another thing coming through at this moment, and of course why I'm sick and why I have been sick with kind of the same type of sickness every time I do get sick. And it has to do with a lot of the phlegm in the body, and phlegm is also connected to grief. Phlegm makes things sticky in the body, and stickiness in the body doesn't allow the energy and the movement of things as free flowing as it needs to be. And so that's where there's a lot of stuck energy that occurs. And grief contributes to a lot of that phlegm. To open and to receive more of our higher self, we have to clear the body. We have to clear those channels. And it happens in stages, it happens in layers. And so even though I've been able to cleanse and clear so many layers, it's like more keeps coming up, more keeps coming up, more keeps coming up. And the same could be going on for you as well. But we are reaching kind of a shifting point in terms of anchoring that higher self because we've been able to go into such deep layers within ourselves. And so a whole new path is kind of making way and opening and allowing for us to step into. This is, of course, part of this greater recalibration occurring right now. So again, there's a lot of people with this same internalized grief and lots of phlegm and a lot of stuck energy in the body. And so they're walking around like zombies if they haven't been conscious enough to clear it layer by layer by layer. And so it just compiles, it compounds, it suppresses more. And so that's kind of the definition of a walking zombie, and walking around with all of that stuck, suppressed, repressed emotion. But this is all changing, and it's changing right now. That internalized grief is beginning to fully clear and dissolve, and many of you will start to feel the letting go of that internal grief and essentially weight. It feels like a deep breath, and it feels like weight coming off of your body, especially the lungs, that lung area, the midsection, right? However, many others are going to feel even more suffocation and more weight in the body, only because they hold on to resistance, because there is a letting go, but they don't want to let go. So they're unable to let go of something that is clearly asking them to let go of. This next part is really powerful because it was kind of a huge aha moment. And what came through is an honest look at grief is that it is not only an emotion stuck to the situation that spawned it. It is also a hybrid emotion and sticks to other emotions. That was powerful because so many people contribute their grief to that one moment in time that sparked that deep grief. And if it's something from your past, you should know that it's now so much more than that situation that spawned it. It has grown into something so much more and has affected so much more of your life than what was initially affected or impacted. For example, have you ever felt a moment of happiness, yet sadness at the same time? That is grief stuck to joy. Have you ever felt the excitement of new opportunity become overshadowed with this sort of gut punch of dread? That is grief stuck to excitement. Grief is a tar-like energy in the body, which weighs it down. This is density. It's part of why we're such dense human beings. It upsets the energetic balance of our bodies, which are naturally energetically buoyant. So with the imbalance of grief over the body, it makes it so that the body feels like it must struggle to get air. It's like you're being held underwater and you're like struggling to get air and something's holding you down. And during this time of powerful recalibration, grief must be anointed in order for our bodies to balance back into its natural buoyant and light state. To tame grief's weed-like nature, you must not overlook it. You must see it. It spreads because it works in the shadows, and we overlook it because it's too overwhelming to see it. Take notice of how grief shows up for you, especially this week and the days heading into the new moon of July. In seeing it, it becomes instantly enlightened. Staying in tune with it will show you all of the ways it has taken over your life without even realizing it. And in knowing all of the ways it has taken over your life, your body can begin to understand why it has been so out of balance. And in understanding why it has been so out of balance, the body will then be able to recalibrate those areas. Now, the thing that has been coming through a lot for me lately is the words, the body knows how to heal itself. The body knows how to rebalance itself. The body knows how to bring everything back into order. We just have to be so allowing enough for our bodies to do its job, for our bodies to do that. But often that inner resistance we feel is what prevents our bodies from doing what it naturally knows what to do. It's us trying to control the situation. It's us trying to control how our bodies should be instead of just allowing our bodies to be. Seeing grief can become a challenge for some people because of denial. Denial is a huge thing. And when I reference those zombies who have all of that suppressed compounded grief and phlegm and inflammation in the body and not doing the work to release those layers, there's a lot of denial there. People who don't want to see their inner stuff. And so they just keep it hidden. And that's the weed-like energy growing in the shadows in the background. And so we have to get over our sense of denial and see it and allow ourselves to see it and be okay with it. Some people deny that they are wounded, and that's a very frustrating thing to work with, but it's very real that people deny that they are wounded. In fact, a lot of people who have a lot of strength actually say, hey, I have all this strength because of my wounds, yes, and that's absolutely possible. But then they disregard their wounds and only focus on the strength, knowing that their wounds created the strength that they're in. And so the strength that they're in is so dependent upon their wounds, if that makes sense. And so they don't want to go back and address their wounds and heal their wounds because the strength that they have now is built upon their wounds being exactly the way that it is. And so there's that mindset, well, if I go back and heal my wounds, maybe my strength will be different right now. And yes, that's possible. The strength may be different than what it was when it was dependent upon your wounds. but it will still be a version of strength. It might just look differently. The strength that maybe once was interpreted as, I'm a tough person, I have a shield, I can stand up for myself because I was wounded in my past, may now translate into a softer version of it, not so tough, but strength in its core, in its essence, which is a foundational strength, and being able to be more of who you are because of the inner strength built upon your past wounds, of course. But now that you've gone and healed those past wounds, you now feel the strength that has risen up from those past wounds in a much different way. Not in so much of a way where you have to combat the world because of those wounds, but in a way where you can now embrace the world through the strength because of those wounds too. It's also very possible that a rejection or abandonment from the past, a grief essentially, is covered up by denial or by excuses as to why it doesn't matter anymore. Like, that thing happened in the past, it no longer matters. But we're here to tell you, your guides are here to tell you that it does matter and that your body still feels like it matters. The covering up is your mind telling you that, oh, it doesn't matter, or don't think about it, that was in the past, or, it was just such a small thing, or I'm not wasting my emotions on something like that, right? But all of those thoughts are denial in one form or another. It is thinking like, oh, it doesn't matter, when really it does. And so we're pushing something aside that really wants us to look at it. And the thing is, your mind may bypass it, your mind might deny it, your mind might cover it up, but your body is going to know it, and your body is still going to feel it. And your body is never going to lie to you, and it can feel beyond what the mind can process. So even if we don't understand, even if we make excuses, even if we deny, the doors don't just close just because we're denying it or making excuses or putting it to the side. The body continues to work beyond our understanding in the background, in the shadows. So this is a perfect time to sit with your grief. You might be feeling your grief coming up right now, currently, or there might be grief from your past that you just kind of want to sit with and check in with. Check in, that's a key word, because grief is such a sticky thing that you may have thought that you've spent so much time healing and dealing with your grief over and over and over again, that you're in a good place now. But it's always good to kind of check in. And when you check in, something might be revealed. Because you may never know if a moment of grief in your past is still being held on to. Because again, like I was saying, how the initial grief impact spreads through so much of our lives, all of our emotions it sticks to. And it's like a weed that just floats in the air, pollinating other things, other experiences, other emotions, other self aspects. Being that grief is one of the stickiest emotions in the body, it is most likely you are still holding on to some kind of grief or another. And if you've been denying that grief for a long time, it may be harder to identify what or where it is. Don't worry. The moment you make the intention for it to be known is the moment doors open to allow it to be made known. And it wants to be known by you. It just needs your allowance, your acceptance, your receptivity of it. So the first step is not to force anything. Just state your intention that you're ready to sit with your grief. You're ready to see it. You're ready to hear it. You're ready to understand it. You're ready to be with it. Don't force anything to come to the surface, but allow it. And when you allow it, I guarantee you that it will come to the surface. It will start bubbling to the surface in one way or another, sometime or another. So take it as it comes, and when it comes, be open enough to see it. It might reveal itself as a hidden grief moment is what came through. And this was powerful because I had a few of these moments to show me where I had hidden grief coming through. And so pay attention to hidden grief moments. It can come up as moments where you no longer feel the grief on the surface level, but your body is still holding on to it in one way or another. So, for example, I had a reflection of grief the other day where I don't feel it on a surface level any longer, but my body was telling me, hey, it's still stuck in some areas of your body. What happened was I was looking at myself in the mirror and I had a thought that was, I love myself and I love my body and I just am fine with who I am when I look at myself in the mirror. But I know that I've done the work to growing into that loving myself. However, I do remember a time, and this reflection actually brought me back to a time in my life, a very long time ago, when I didn't love myself when I looked in the mirror. And there was all these things I was doing in terms of self-harm and not loving my body and doing things to fix my body or change my weight and stuff like that. And so that realization came to the surface. And that was the hidden grief that was still in my body. And it was asking me, do you remember that time when you didn't love me, when you didn't love your body? And this was what it was. I realized again, I had worked through it over many years of tuning into loving my body. You know, letting the diets go, letting the over excessive working out go, letting the counting the pounds go. But it was a journey to the point where I realized I was just outgrowing it, right? Through the conscious journey. But I never went back to the beginning of acknowledging the initial grief. And so it's interesting that sometimes when we do work through something, it doesn't necessarily mean that the emotional effects of the initial grief aren't still there. And that's something really important that I think a lot of us are still going through, because we might not feel that grief any longer on the surface because we've transformed, but somewhere in our bodies, it still remembers when we were in that grief. And those emotional effects are still lingering somewhere for a lot of us as stored energy. And so, again, even though I no longer feel that grief, I still store it in my body. And so I've been going through a lot of stuff this year, physical stuff, physical healing of things coming to the surface and realizing how connected it is to a lot of that past grief that my body was still storing for me. And I know a lot of you are also going through a lot of physical ailments, a lot of feeling like the body is breaking down. And it's not. It's the grief showing itself physically of where it was stored for such a long time. And now that our bodies are able to kind of fully process it and release it, it does so through the physical. Because in many ways, you've worked through the emotional release. And of course, you might still have emotional releases tied to it. But it's now about the physical letting go. It's about the physical body letting go. And so when I had that moment in the mirror, the acknowledgement of, hey, there was a time in my life when I didn't feel this way, when I was very much in grief of my body. That was an aha moment. And in that aha moment, there was a deep letting go, a physical letting go. Almost like a full circle, if you will. I think that's a big part of this recalibration that we're going through right now, is making full circles of a lot of the things we've been working through, acknowledging, hey, we've been on this long journey, and now let's go back to the beginning to remember where we came from. And that's the full circle. That's the acknowledgement of the journey, where it started, why you got here in the first place. And I think with that acknowledgement, there's such a huge release that is mind, body, spirit all at once. And that's part of the letting go, the deepening into allowance, deepening into receptivity, deepening into opening, which allows instant connection with your higher self because of that acknowledgement, instant alignment, instant letting go, instant recalibration and rebalancing of the body. We don't realize how dispersed our initial feelings of grief have become in our lives. It's really like pollen in the air, and it finds a place to land anywhere in our lives, and it sticks, it plants itself, and it grows. And so we must be very aware of the presence of grief in our lives so that we, number one, don't accept it as just the way we are. We don't accept it as, hey, this is just who I am, right? And identify with it, which is what often happens with depression and anxiety and those deeper states. But also number two, so that we can be fully conscious of what parts of our emotions need peeling back, need to be sat with, need to be seen and opened, so that we can begin to feel the full extent of our experiences without the weight of these other emotions piggybacking into the experience from the shadows or from the background. This is so important to being able to fully feel our experience for exactly what it is, rather than what we think it is or how it's illusion to be from our mind space. It's part of clearing everything up. It's part of bringing clarity to our experience. And I know so many people, if not every single person, is seeking clarity. And we're seeking clarity because our emotions are not offering us that clarity. For example, with this grief, it's overshadowing a lot of our emotions. And in that overshadow, we get stuck in fully experiencing our lives, but also fully receiving our experiences too, in the way that they were meant to be received, fully, wholeheartedly, completely opened. So that's the first integration with this deep recalibration going on within us right now. And it's so powerful. I've been feeling it for the past few weeks. And so it's something to really sit with for this week and for the weeks to come as well, as you work with it in your own lives and process it in your own way. But I want to present you with 3 powerful questions that you can ask yourself and do deep inner reflection with. Also, do journaling with is a great way to unpack this as well. And it's going to help open the door for your grief to show itself, or especially that hidden grief to show itself as well. And it's also a great way to sit with your grief and to be open to it, to hear it, to see it, and to just be with it. And these are 3 initial questions. And I want these initial questions to open up more things for you. Think of it as like a doorway. So allow it to be the doorway for you to then explore more of what presents itself to you. Number 1, am I able to fully express my grief, or do I gloss over it? Number 2, if I am able to fully express my grief, have I come to peace with it? Or if I am not fully able to express my grief, can I allow myself to be still enough with my grief to hear what it has to say? And number 3, if I can be still enough with my grief, what are the 3 things my grief has to share with me? If you ask your grief this question and become still enough with it, it will show you the answers. So again, allow this to be the doorway. These 3 questions in that order will open the door for your grief to share with you in a deeper way. And as your grief begins to show itself, layer by layer, dive into it and ask it questions from an observational standpoint so that you can fully understand. Because understanding is what brings closure, inner peace, and ultimately letting go. Your grief will talk to you, and the more you open yourself up to it, the more it will feel safe enough to reveal even more things to you. And that's what came through. I've had about enough. I can't talk anymore. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you in the next episode, and hopefully my voice will be a lot better. Thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for all of your support. If you want to read the transcript to this episode, go over to my newsletter. I'll post the link to my newsletter in the description of this episode. Click on it, subscribe so that you can receive my newsletter straight to your inbox and you don't miss any of them. And in the meantime, sit with your grief, sit with this integration, allow your body to recalibrate how it's supposed to recalibrate, and I'll see you in the next episode. Oneness, love, and peace be with you.